controversial subjects with the facts can be tense, but we are a sub-science here to make things make sense.
I'm perfect.
What did you say?
I said I'm perfect.
Oh my God.
This podcast is about me. Actually, it deeply is.
I honestly like.
I'm not perfect, by the way, and
no.
I suffer from perfectionism, or I have, and I feel that I've come a long way.
Yeah, you worked really, like, I.
Careful what you say, mister.
No, I know. I am like, oh my God. When I was doing this research, I was like, oh my God, this is a huge part of your life, I think. And you have worked on it a lot. And I like to think that I like have some perfectionist traits, but I'm like, do I have the opposite problem? Like, am I like,
what would it be called?
Like, I don't know.
Messy?
Like sucking at life. No.
I'm trying to think, what is the, like.
No, I actually think it's so sliding scale. So I'm actually going to read some studies definitions to start off about perfectionism, but I think it will help people. Excessive concern over making mistakes, high personal standards, doubts about quality of actions, perception of high parental expectations, perception of parental criticism, preference for organization and orderliness are like six like 6 factors.
Check.
That like
check.
But there are other we'll get more in detail in the studies, but like I sometimes it's sliding scale. If I'm around certain people, I feel like I'm a perfectionist in that group.
Right.
It's rare. I can think about high school. I can think about times where I'm like, in a group project and I'm like, these standards aren't to my, come on people. But in my life and living with you, I'm like, oh my God, I'm so not that. And I kind of look down on myself sometimes for that. And reading this, I made me realize how hard, perfectionism is.
First, I'll say that, I think it's probably situational. Like, I don't think you don't carry traits of perfectionism, but that doesn't mean, like, you don't have to be a perfectionist to excel and try hard and do well in certain scenarios, right? Like, just because you're trying to do well on an exam doesn't mean you're a perfectionist. So I think it's because you can see yourself trying hard. You're like, you don't want to say that. It's like, you're not actually the opposite of perfectionism, but you just have like a normal level. And in certain situations, you probably take some things more seriously. You have a better gauge on when to like let go of something.
Yeah. But okay, so when did you first sort of think that you were a perfectionist or real? Like, honestly, my
what I will
reading this
say,
stuff, it was crazy.
Oh God. So for me, I think when I was younger, I was given the impression, and I think a lot of people were, that perfectionism was a good trait. Like, I remember being proud to be a perfectionist. I remember that word meant a good thing. It meant like you try, like in my mind, it was like, that means you try really hard and you care about like the things that you're doing. So you're not lazy and you're...
So you self-identified as a perfectionist from a young age?
Probably, not like from, probably when I was in high school is when I started to be like, I try really hard. I'm working hard in school. I like practice my piano. I do all these things, and I could start to realize, I don't know if it was associated with how other people perceived me and would say like, wow, like you're really good at that thing. And then I'd be like, well, I'm a perfectionist. That's why, right? And I probably heard that word, and I think for a long time, it was like a personality trait that I would say out loud and feel proud to say. And people would be like, wow, that's amazing. You're a perfectionist.
Wow.
And so it never even like struck me or occurred to me that it could be bad.
When did it start to occur to you that it could be bad?
When you like face severe depression in your 20s and you're
no, don't say no. Like, is that true?
Yeah, I think okay. Without getting like too personal and like talking too much about like people in my life, I think in university is when you start to see, it's the first time you're like held up against like other people. Like in high school and grade school, it's kind of easy to be standout as well. You're in a smaller group who's like localized to where you're from. In university, life becomes harder. School becomes harder. Like I didn't do as well as I thought I would. And so I think I started to see the burden of putting so much pressure on myself and not being able to live up to that standard. But that didn't necessarily fix it. I think for many years, I just thought I just have to be even better. I just have to like work even harder and obsess and whatever. And it's not always expressed in like academics. Like you kind of even mentioned like being orderly. That's like a way it's expressed more recently as I've gotten older. Like I was never like super clean or anything.
Preference for organization and orderliness. It's just a way to clock. Okay, wait, when you start thinking, am I a perfectionist? Is someone I know a perfectionist? If someone's obsessed with orderliness, it's just a place to start thinking.
Yeah, and that can, I'm sure, be linked to a lot of other things. For example, like people who have OCD or different levels of like compulsions to want things to be clean. It might not be.
They're not necessarily perfectionists. Just thinking about that.
But I think, I don't know. It's really hard when you evaluate yourself, especially on a podcast. It's probably more useful in like with a psychologist or a therapist. But it's hard to like untwine things. So a lot of times for me, being orderly is because I don't have a great memory. So I'm like, when I organize files on a computer, if I don't do it a certain way, I will have a hard time later. Right? So I'm like, well, was it because I'm a perfectionist and I need it to be a certain way? Or is it because I found a system that makes my life easier? But at the core of it, at some point, probably took till my 30s. I'm sure in my late 20s.
It feels like a recent thing you've really worked on.
Yeah, I think
and
like
really done well with.
Finding, I'm just like, don't want to keep talking about myself, but hopefully it's like interesting enough to other people who either suffer from it or know other people. I think it was helpful in one way to have a level of success and then be like, none of this fucking matters. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
To still not be happy, to be like, my perfectionism actually never leads to happiness. When I was younger, I thought that was correlated. I thought being a perfectionist can get me to a place where I will be happy and proud and satisfied. And then spending a long enough time in your life when you realize like, wait, everything's just a new benchmark, that resets the scale. Once you have X, now it's just not enough and your perfectionism
so you're less
just wants
like
more.
being like, oh, my perfectness is striving to get certain things, and then you got them and you're like, wait, I don't even want these.
Yeah, or just like nothing when it comes to money or success or like having things like, what do you call like
material
possessions. I think a lot of people learn that lesson. You realize as you age, you're like, wait, this is like pretty meaningless. I really thought my perfectionism was for a reason. And as I got older, I realized all it's doing is making life hell in the moment with the hope that the future will be better. And that's not a guarantee.
Also, why this podcast and the studies are interesting is realizing that when you read about perfectionism, it's all from a psychological standpoint of how bad it can be for people's lives.
Yeah.
I think for you, there was a point where like, I've known you for so long. I'd say the first 7 or 8 years of our relationship, you were not willing to admit that it could be a bad thing.
Totally. I genuinely believed it wasn't.
Yeah. And I think it was
because it was part of my
identity.
And part of like the things I'd achieved. I've been like, if I wasn't a perfectionist, I wouldn't have gotten like people being proud of me for those moments, or people saying, wow, like he did really like play that piano piece so well. You know, you think like, oh, my trait got me to this point that I'm proud of.
But I feel like maybe one of the main things even before getting it and realizing it was pointless was maybe starting to be like, even almost if you had read these studies earlier, it would have helped to be like, wait, it's not always a good thing. And that's what these studies are saying. Being a perfectionist isn't always a bad thing. I think a lot of the psychological studies are around it being damaging and leading to depression, because I think a lot of people actually think it's a good thing, and so they're kind of like counteracting it. And a lot of the studies say, we're not here to say whether it's good or bad. It's about trying to figure out what part of it serves your life well and what part of it serves it negatively. And I think it like is surprising how much of it can serve negative. I feel like for me, there was a moment where I think you were able to accept it was a bad thing, which took a long time. And once that happened, it felt like it was probably easier to be like, okay, now I have to deal with the repercussions of it. Whereas before I wasn't even willing to admit that there could be bad things.
And like, to be clear, like these traits are with me probably forever.
Oh God, you still
like
have them.
Now I can recognize in general, like I easily can recognize now it's not a point blank good thing.
Yeah.
And in fact, I can recognize most of the times it's like actually destructive. But like when I am editing or when I am creating something, like those traits are nearly impossible for me to give up without even with you on the outside being like, it's done.
No, it doesn't even matter what I say.
Yeah, but those things do help as like little like boundary keepers. But yeah, there's so many psychological studies that link it to depression, anxiety, self-harm, eating disorders.
Yeah,
like,
so
it's a severe, ultimately, like judgment. And I realize over time, like I have severe judgment of myself. Like I don't know that I have, there's like self-oriented perfectionism and other oriented.
Yeah, here, wait, let's go. Okay, let's get into some of the like, I'm going to say a little more of the study stuff, then you'll keep talking because I feel like you're going to have so much more interesting information.
Okay.
But yeah, there's 3 orientations of perfectionism. So self-oriented is when you have high standards for yourself. Socially prescribed is when you feel like others expect you to be perfect. So it's not about your own,
like your own standard.
it's about the fact that you think everyone else is looking at you, listening to you, judging
expecting you to be. Yeah.
And you can have all of them because
Yeah.
in these ones I'm like, these are all you. Underoriented is when you actually place high standards on others and everyone needs to be up to your standards.
Yeah.
And then in that same study, they said that they do think perfectionism is considered a cognitive distortion. And so a cognitive distortion is merely just like a lie that your brain sends to your conscious mind. And some cognitive distortions we can get into, but like, actually, yeah, no, let's just keep talking about that. So self-oriented, high standards for yourself. Socially prescribed, feeling like everyone else is judging you, so you have to be perfect. Other-oriented, holding other people to higher standards. Like, do you identify with one more than the other? They said they all bleed together.
Yeah, I can see like examples of them all in my life. I think for sure the first two, self-oriented and socially, like the ones that reflect on me, end up hitting more. Like I might in some instances think that other people should behave a certain way, but in general, I don't think other people should be perfectionists.
Yeah, I feel like that was the
really-
least. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, every now and then, and honestly, you probably get the brunt of it when I'm like, the house should be tidied like this or organized like this. Like those ones might be putting it out in the world, but I don't know. Like I don't expect it of other people really. There might be some neurotic situations where I'm like, why didn't that person do it that way?
Yeah,
That annoys
but I
me,
always think about how hard it is for you to work with other people.
Oh, totally.
Like you don't work well and collaborate well, and I'm like, it has to. To me, I'm like, it's your perfectionism because.
Yeah.
And you even there's this famous thing in our work where I have to do it alone because if I include you in it, then it has to become to your standards, and now everything I've done is a wash because you're now like, well, it has to be as good as I would do it, and that means I'm going to get so involved.
Yeah.
And we've had to work really hard with like making you actually like having long conversations before I get you involved with things to be like, I don't want all of your perfectionist input. I just want your instinct.
Right.
And then you've sort of gotten better at that. But to be honest, we've just actually started working separately.
Yeah.
Like it's so interesting when I was reading these things. I was like, it really is, I think, one of your biggest challenges in your life.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because I do see it on one level, and I think this is true about everyone and their traits, is sometimes like your greatest strength is your greatest weakness.
Yes. Yeah.
Like I obviously want to be able to still be proud of like the things I've worked hard on and the things I've spent a lot of time on. And it's hard for me to just like fully be like, well, not entangle that like my perfectionism was part of me being able to do those things well because I would like obsess over them.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
But I think what it is it's like realizing that, I mean, this is me observing you, it's been so intense and it so is about you. Whereas I'm like, I want to be like, I'm sort of one too, right? But like, I'm like actually a mess. But like, I think you still have so, like, when I think about your issues that sometimes get generally like you'll talk to me and they'll get blanketed under like something else going on. When I was doing this research, I'm like, I feel like so many of your challenges are actually linked to this specific trait as I read about it, which I found so interesting, which is like even the idea of one of the biggest issues in a meta-analysis was that perfectionism leads to procrastination. And I was like, can't like there's a project that you've just finished that has taken you 2 years.
Yeah.
That like if we were switching places and I had your skills would have taken me literally a week because I would have put
rude.
No, but it wouldn't have been as good. It would have been like it's unbelievably amazing what you have done, but like it is so interesting to me as I was reading about procrastination.
Well, I mean, you're right. Ultimately, I did probably finish it in a month's amount of work, and it took me 2 years. Do you know what I mean?
Like I put it off. I
overwhelmed myself.
Yeah.
And I overanalyzed certain parts and spent way too much time on them. And then there was probably an actual year break where I was like, it's not good enough. I can't do this. I'm going to cancel it. And so I just like stopped working on it. But then when I finally was able to get over that, it took me 2 weeks.
And
to
it
finish.
is like 1,000 times better than anything I would ever make. Do you know what I mean? Like if that's the interesting part is it's like it's not all bad. Like you create high quality things. I think a lot of actually there was another article that was like saying that a lot of successful people aren't perfectionists.
Yeah, it makes sense. Like now looking back as a quote unquote older person, like just having like more life experience, I think it's more I see people who are actually really successful being willing to put out stuff that's just like keep going, just keep making things getting better. And I definitely get hung up. And my hope is like, I need this first thing to be perfect versus, you know what? Sometimes you don't know if something's a good idea or a bad idea till it's like out in the world. And it's better to just have lots of ideas. Not to say you wouldn't put time into them. Like, no. I think that is your greatest strength, is that you are willing to be like, good enough, move on, because I actually can't know. Especially when it comes to art, it's like you have to just make more. And that's a lesson I have a really hard time like internalizing.
But at the same time, there is also like, I'm on the other end, so I'm like, I honestly wouldn't mind if like I had a little bit more like,
the only way I see it as positive for me is that it sometimes when I'm not procrastinating will allow me to spend ungodly amounts of hours on something. In a way that when I'm motivated, even if it's like board games or video games, like I don't see myself as a perfectionist in that space, but when
you are.
When I want to be good, I'll play a video game for so long to get better at it.
When it's your turn in a board game, when it's my turn, I have pressure. I'm like, oh, this. You'll wait. You'll think. If you were playing chess, you would take the time to think about the moves ahead. That's how you win the game. Like it is. There's definitely positive parts.
But then I take a year off a project. Do you know what I mean? So it's like sometimes I way overthink.
So another meta-analysis was looking at perfectionism in job applicants, because again, a lot of people will write, I'm a perfectionist on a job applicant.
Like a good thing.
Application, because they think it's a good thing. And also hirers, what the hell are their names? Employers. Okay. Employers.
Okay, anti-capitalist over here.
Employers.
The hell are they called?
will also see perfectionism as a trait that they want to hire. Right. So they did this meta-analysis of job applications and then like following up on people, and found that it did lead to them working longer hours and seeming more engaged with their jobs. Mm-hmm. But the issues were interwork tension. A lot of the people created a lot of tension within the workspace as they constantly wanted other people to be up to their standards, and they were like seen as not good team players. Yeah. And they would sometimes be the worst procrastinators who would not get their work done on time because they felt they were going to lose respect and would completely not complete tasks or quit before giving something in that they thought would make them lose respect. Yeah. And it was like, oh, that's so interesting, because I think a lot of those people would put down, I'm a perfectionist, like be done with it and be like, I'm going to get hired. And I think a lot of employers would also hire them. And it's like, oh, wait, there's actually these other parts. It's just remembering it's not all good, because I do think there is a lot of good, though. Like you create.
Yeah, but I don't know if the good is being a perfectionist, right? Like the good is having a good work ethic and knowing how and when to put in the time and the details that are like, it's the same reason that like so many studies on like good managers and stuff, it really is good enough, move on. To know when you're at 80% and know that to get 5% more is actually going to take 10 times as long. Yeah. Right? And being able, like they always say, like a good leader is actually somebody who can to know that point. It's like such a good skill, and perfectionists don't know that point. So I think perfectionism actually like masks what is actually the good trait. Like those people who are perfectionists, including myself, have good traits. It is like attention to detail. It's like being organized. It's wanting something to be good. But then perfectionism gets to like take the claim to that. But there's people who aren't perfectionists who have those traits and who can be really good at working and creating things and motivating people and teamwork. Like those are, I just don't think, I don't think perfectionism should get to claim any of those things. Yeah. I think in my experience,
I've been on the other end. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I know what it feels like to be like, when I think about,
but you're
like,
saying it, you're not like,
I just remember once I was like, I was like working at a camp. There was 3 of us. Like, I don't need to name names, but like if they're listening, it's so funny. It was like me and my 2 friends. One I would say is a perfectionist. The other one I'd say isn't. And then there's me. The one who's a perfectionist left for their days off at camp, and we were in charge of like organizing what the kids would do. And these kids were like older. They were like 13, 14. We're panicking. We're like, oh my God, I don't know. We're going to do like a canoe. Like we're going to read books in the canoes, and then we're going to swim. Okay, we're going to swim in the canoes. The day comes, they're like, oh yeah, in order to like do that canoe thing, that's great, but you need to have 2 extra lifeguards. We're like, what? They're like, everyone's booked. It's the day of. We're like, oh, okay. Well, they're like, you can go out in the canoes, but you can't get in the water. And we're like, oh, that's fine. So we just go, we get them all down. They all have their books. We go out in the canoe. It's blaring hot. They're all, oh, I'm getting sunburned. Can we please jump in? We're like, sorry, nope, just keep reading. We're like canoeing around. They're burning in the sun. They start to be like, where is, I'm not going to name names, the third person. We're like, day off. And they're all just like, this sucks. Like, this is not organized. That person is not here. That person with the attention to detail is gone, and they're now aware. Maybe we were relying on them, but it's just like, there's funny moments where I'm like, well, I wish I had a little bit more of that. So like, they're obvious. It's not all bad,
right?
But I think perfectionism, if people identify as having it, which you do, when reading these studies, it is pretty bad. Like, it's pretty challenging. Yeah. And there will always be those good parts that you'll have.
This way, like, when it ultimately in our lives, we're like trying to feel satisfied and happy. And I think someone who's carefree and makes mistakes gets to be carefree about their mistakes. Right?
Yeah, to be honest,
somebody
me and
who's
my
a
friend laugh about
perfectionist
that all the time. Like, remember when we burnt those kids? And like, I do think that they hopefully like still
had a funny memory.
A great memory, but like truly we didn't care.
Right.
We were like, LOL, lols. like we didn't actually get.
Like,
and like,
that's the benefit of being carefree. You don't have to feel, not that you don't feel bad about it, but nothing's that big a deal. Whereas even a perfectionist, when you get it to 99%, you're not happy.
Yeah. So these are some other cognitive distortions of perfectionism based on studies, which is all or nothing thinking, which is something that blew my mind about you, because I say that to you all the time. I'm like, I didn't know it had anything to do with perfectionism, but I'm like, that's like, you'll be like, it's either this or nothing at all. And it's like, as someone who's not a perfectionist, I'm like, there's 1,000 other options. And like, I say to you, like, that's an insane all or nothing thinking. And then you'll just like look out the window and be like, and I'll be like, so all or nothing thinking, which is that like, yeah, I mean, I don't even know how to describe what that even is.
That's like a curse for me for sure. Like, it's very difficult.
Either it's this way or there's no point in doing it.
Because there's a right way when you're a perfectionist, right? So it's like, well, why do it anyway but the right way? I'm not saying this is reasonable. I'm just saying it feels the same. Even something as innocuous as the way to organize a drawer. It's like, well, why would we at all organize it if it's just going to be bad?
I also remember like the first time I was living alone, like I was teaching in like London, and I had like a little room, like apartment room. And it was like the first thing I had to clean. And I remember just like my friend was over, and she was clearly a perfectionist and was like helping me clean. I don't even know what. I feel like she came in and was like, the hell, you live here? And we were like cleaning, and then like the TV was on like I don't know, like we're in Britain, so like a Chesterfield or something. And I just like,
I think that's a Canadian word, actually.
Move the TV. I just dusted. Yeah. And then she was like, what are you doing? And I was like, well, I'm done. And there was like obviously dust still under where the TV stand was. Yeah. And she was like, you move the TV and you don't. I'm like, well, what the? And she's like, what is the point in cleaning if you're there with the towel and you're not going to move the TV and do that? There's no point in even cleaning if you're not going to do. I just remember, and I like stuck with me because I'll still be cleaning and I'll be like, well, I'm not going to like move that. I'm just going to dust around it. And her voice comes into my head like, what is even the point of you doing this whole thing? And I'm like, well, because I dusted everything else.
Right. Like, and then you're like, and the part is hidden.
Yeah, but it was like, okay, that was a perfectionist and me cleaning together. She was like, you might as well have just not started. It was interesting. It stuck out.
I sort of think at the base of it, and this is anecdotal and for me, but obviously supported by some research, is that perfectionism is the result of some sort of underlying anxiety or severe self-judgment or something else that is pushing you to be that way. Because it's like, you're not just like a perfectionist. You don't just care so much about it. It's usually because you fear the result on the other side is either judgment from other people or something is going to go wrong if it's not done right. Like, you know what I mean? Like the fear of being hurt by something being uncleaned and getting moldy, and now that's going to damage my property and do bad things. Like, but that's like a type
your
of
fear of mold is insane.
Wait, really?
Yeah, you have an I would say an overblown fear of mold.
I do not.
Yes,
I'm actually not. I do not.
You sniff like gorgeously fresh yogurt and you're like, I don't know. I'm like, well, it's not moldy. Like, it's like,
no, that's because you literally don't have like sense perception.
Mitch, I'm like,
Greg will full on eat just like moldy food, and I'm like, and then you'll be like, I have a tummy ache for 2 days. I'm like, you eat moldy food.
Moldy food. I'm not eating like blue cheese ass yogurt. I am not doing that. Other things that perfectionists do: overgeneralization. Okay, I'm just gonna go through them because I feel like I'm getting distracted because it's so interesting. But it's overgeneralization, mental filters that only focus on the negatives, discounting the positives in situations, jumping to conclusions, magnification or minimization of like life events, emotional reasoning, which is weird. It's like I have no confidence in my abilities. I must be a terrible like person. Like making your like ability your whole being.
Right, your personality or like your personal failure.
Yeah, and should statements like I should be department head by now.
Yeah.
And then like basing your identity on
should be the department head of ASAP Science by now.
basing your identity on it's called labeling, like basing your identity on the minor mistake you did like in that moment. And then just like blaming, like personalization and just blaming things on yourself like that you don't need to do.
Yeah.
There's like another study just like went through them all. They're all just so intense.
Yeah, it is really intense. That's what I mean. I think it comes down to like these other, for me, a lot of this perfectionist traits come out of like severe fight or flight responses. Not always severe, but it's like, it's fear-based. You know what I mean? It's like the idea that I have to do it a certain way or else what? But I don't actually like explore that. That's what we have to learn in therapy. Like,
yeah, what if?
What if that happens?
Yeah.
Okay, well, what if that happens? Like going to the natural conclusion and then realizing, oh, that's actually not that big a deal.
Yeah.
What if people don't like this? Okay, so then what?
Yeah.
What if that happens? Like, are you going to die?
So that helps you?
Yeah, but I don't know. Like, I don't normally go through that brain process. I just get stuck in the like, this needs to be done this way because it has to be the best it can be. Otherwise, I'm going to be judged harshly.
Some studies have these things called 30 days of dare to be average, which is like they'll take perfectionists, like psychologists will get, like if they figure out that their patient's a perfectionist, for 30 days, they like dare them to be like imperfect, not give in to their fear. Like, and apparently it helps them be like way more creative, let inspiration and passion rule rather than contemplating.
My therapist tried this once. I mean, maybe I can't remember if I said this on the podcast.
Really?
I've definitely told you. He was like, you need to go in public and make an embarrassing, stupid joke in front of your friends or in front of strangers. That was my challenge in therapy.
Did you do it?
No.
Oh my God. In fact, know what you did? Procrastination. You quit therapy probably. Oh, sorry. Sick, done.
He's a bad therapist,
Not
actually.
even kidding. You did that. That's so funny.
No, I did not quit. I still go to this therapist.
Sorry,
like,
but
but I did talk to him about it. I was like, I did take time away. It was probably then, but we talked about it. And it was just like the idea for me of feeling like the awareness of cringe and having to pretend that I didn't care. Like, well, I would have to be like immediately if I did that. Like my therapist made me do that.
Well, the other or socially prescribed perfections when you feel like others expect you to be perfect, like that is the like we're at a restaurant and I can't talk loud vibes.
Yeah,
it's like it is interesting. It links to how in public you're constantly like, it's crazy.
Well, here's my challenge.
No, I do talk loud. I do talk loud, and
my challenge is you. No, literally,
but like
in everything, and I've talked about this in therapy. And I'm sure other people will agree. In everything, and for things for you as well, it's sometimes difficult to know the line between when is what I want appropriate and when is it over the top. So like, lots of people want pause. Lots of people want a calm, civilized society where everyone can mind their business and just like chill. Oh my God. Right? Like there are different levels of that in different societies. I would laugh so hard when we visited Japan because it's so orderly on the subway. It's so quiet. And then here you and our friend are just talking so loud. Everyone's absolutely staring at us. And I'm like, that's how I feel everywhere I go with you. But at the same time, it's like, well, you didn't actually do anything bad. Like you didn't actually, it's not like you're going crazy on this. Well,
I also think
it's me figuring out like, when is it appropriate to be like, you're actually interrupting other people's lives in a negative way versus, oh, I'm just overanalyzing and overthinking it.
Yeah. I mean, I do feel like I act the same on the subway or at a restaurant, and the reaction will be different from you than from other people, and will be different from other people who maybe have perfectionism too.
Say that again. Sorry. What?
Like I act the same, which is maybe like quite loud. I love being at a restaurant and laughing and being like joyous.
Yeah.
And I think that like I don't think of it as bad at all. Like I think of it as like, but like I'm saying your reaction to it is always very specific.
Because sometimes you're on the subway and you don't realize, but you're literally like half sitting on a stranger.
That's what I'm just saying. There's obviously, I'm trying to say there are other people who also clock that in me who are probably more perfectionists than there are other people who are also like me being loud and exuberant on the subway.
Yeah, and I have a severe fear of like inconveniencing or bothering other people. And there's not a lot of examples where it's come to fruition, but there's enough that have self-perpetuated it. Like I remember, this wasn't your fault, but we were out to dinner with a group of friends once. I remember like having such a nice time laughing. We were at an Indian restaurant, and this man from another table came over and was like, "Can you please be quiet?" But it was like we actually were not being that loud.
No, we were actually being fun, and he was also gross.
Yeah, but like, in those moments, that gave me so much anxiety.
But like, how? Okay, that man, he literally looked like a villain from a Disney movie. He was like this white man in like a suit who was like a lawyer with his like Karen wife. Like they were so like.
Well, to be honest, what I thought was it was not just him with his wife. They were with like maybe 5 other people, of which one was maybe our age, but the rest looked like older. And I thought maybe their hearing's not good, and actually they can't hear each other, which is fine. But you know, it goes back and forth between the balance of like, but we actually weren't being like screaming or anything.
And they were
laughing.
Truly, I was like, this is like a book club that has decided to come here. The way they were speaking was like they were like, and should we?
Yeah, we were at a loud restaurant to begin with.
And it was an Indian restaurant packed full of people. It was like not just us. It was bad like acoustics. Mm-hmm. I understand that could have been frustrating, but it was funny. Like when we left, I was like, that they sucked.
Yeah.
Whereas you might have left and been like, we sucked.
I do, but then I also have a flip in my head that goes, those people suck so much, because then I was so mad at them. Yeah. And I was like, even though it gave me so much
you're
anxiety.
right. We did you were able to express how it could have been hard for them just now. It wasn't like you hated them. I was
but he did look evil, and I remember the young girl was embarrassed, and I kept staring at her. I was like, "You better speak to that man."
That's so no, his vibe was so
it was awful.
Scary.
But so that's always my fear, is to genuinely when we shouldn't be, disturb other people, and that is definitely related to some level of perfectionism, because I don't want to appear a certain way. And again, it's always me going back to like, I know it can be linked with depression, anxiety, all these things, but I think also anxiety can perpetuate perfectionism.
Yeah. Another like things that can help is making pros and cons lists. And they showed in the study a visual depiction of perfectionist pros and cons list, and there's literally like 1 pro and then like 48 cons for all the things that and they said one of the simplest things is just make a pros and cons list to the thing that's bothering you, and you'll realize you're writing down all these cons, and the pro is like, it's perfect or something.
What?
Like, okay, that's like so horribly explained. So you make a pros and cons list about your self-identified perfectionism in that moment.
Like about what I'm doing. Like, okay, I made this video.
You literally have a music video that, in my opinion, is done, but you keep saying you have things you want to do. Mm-hmm. That's perfectionism. You write down the pros and cons list
of what,
of
like,
you continuing to work on the thing versus not. And
done.
You might like, and it was interesting how often these cons would come up that then people would look and be like, oh my God, this is like not an even pros and cons.
In a good way or in a bad way? That's what I don't get. I think having a lot of cons is like, if I'm
the cons to your perfectionism, to continuing to work on your music video.
I see. Okay.
The cons would be it doesn't come out. I find even more mistakes.
Yeah.
I do all this work and then it doesn't even matter because people don't even like it anyways.
Versus the pro is it gets like 1% better.
Like literally some people, they would not be able to figure out the pro.
Got it.
To the perfectionist action.
No, you're right. You did that when you said it was done, and I was like, no, there's so much left I want to do on this video. And then I was like, for what? Like literally the things I wanted to fix on this video was like the placement of the lyrics by like pixel, like the tiniest amount of frames.
Do a pros and cons on that.
And I was like, then I did stop and I was like, actually no one's gonna care.
Yeah.
But I want it, in my mind before thinking about that, I was like, but I want it in the right spot, the spot that looks the best.
But okay, this is when I like can relate about like when I paint, like I am like, I don't like any of my paint. Like it's like you like you want to keep I'm around you who are the biggest perfectionist that I truly know in my life. So I'm like, I'm crazy, I'm messy, but I'm like, I can relate to that feeling. I'm like, I could definitely keep working on these paintings because I hate them. But then it's like you show them to people and they're like, oh my God, I love it. And they like don't even think about how it's not done.
Yeah.
And you like, I definitely am like, okay, I have to, it sucks that I'm not proud. Like it sucks that I'm not like, this is amazing. I haven't really felt that like ever. Even when I think that for like an hour, then an hour later, I'm like, ugh. Like that is like kind of the nature of creating. And another tactic that they talk about is you have to learn how to be process oriented. You have to learn how to like enjoy the process. So that's why with painting, I'm like, okay, I go into a flow state. It makes me feel really accomplished when I do it. It definitely doesn't make me sad. The only time I actually feel sad about it is when I'm done painting and I look at it and I'm like,
having to judge it.
Or like you judge it and you're just like, and that is like what they're saying is perfectionists do. They're always thinking about the outcome of the product, not what it feels like to do it. And I feel like I can relate to that too. Like I have to force myself to remember that.
Totally. Yeah. That's something I've had to try so hard to think about. I have to force myself as well.
And like also looking at mistakes as opportunities for growth. Like with paintings, it's like
it's okay if there's a mistake. Now your next painting, you'll have learned something.
Yeah, but I have a hard time with that too. I'm just like, I hate that painting. It sucks. It just reminds me of the little mistake that's on it.
I know. With that sort of thing, it's interesting because if I look at something from 10 years ago, I'll easily be like, oh, so good. Like, good job. Like, when you're...
Really?
Well, even if it's bad objectively, it's... Sorry, not objectively, but even if it's like more rough because it's less refined, because I've spent 10 years getting better at something, it's easier to be judgmental to yourself long enough away as though it's a friend.
Weird. I disagree. I get so...
You hate your old paintings. But aren't you like proud that you tried them? I just feel like there are things that in the moment I obsess over, but sometimes I see something from a long time ago. Yeah, there's times when I'm like, that's cringy, like that we did that. But there are things that I remember either like being not totally satisfied, it didn't feel done and we still put it out, or like it didn't perform that well, whatever. Now I look back and I'm like, no,
okay, yeah, I can relate to that
because I don't identify with that person as much anymore. That version
totally.
Of me, that it's easier, kind of like when a friend shows you something, you're not going to be harsh. You're going to be like, that's cool that you did that.
Yeah.
Regardless of if there's, even if I notice a mistake, that's still cool.
Yeah.
I have a study that I was going to bring up that I thought was interesting as well before we like wrap up. So basically there were like 2 big meta-analyses published in the last year. And what they found was that the main factors, or 2 of the main factors for perfectionism, were parental expectations and criticism.
Oh yeah, we haven't talked about that. Because that is like, well, where does it come from? And it is...
And they played again. They said both in self-oriented and other-oriented.
Wait, but parental criticism
and expectations as 2 distinct things. But what was interesting was that parental expectations had a way bigger impact, not their criticism necessarily. Like obviously their criticism did, but it was more what you as a young person thought your parents expected of you that made you drive for perfectionism. So it's that like young people internalize these expectations and depend on them for their self-esteem. So when your parents don't necessarily teach you that their expectations, it's okay to like be below, or it's okay to fail sometimes, which is inevitable. If you're just living up to their expectations, you're much more likely to be critical of yourself for not matching.
That's so, because remember recently we were talking about like scrutiny and how like you like aren't like your parents weren't necessarily like always saying you did this wrong, but even you were saying, but by them saying, oh, like by them even congratulating you when you did things well,
totally,
but maybe just ignoring or not saying anything about when you did things wrong.
I don't think I got criticized heavily because I was a high achiever, but it was self-perpetuated, or not self, it was like perpetuated by praise. It was perpetuated by, it's not like my parents to me ever said like, you must achieve this goal.
But didn't you get like money for grades and stuff like that?
Only maybe when I was really young, not really young, but there might have been like a year or 2 where it was kind of like celebratory. If you got like an A+, I don't remember if it was money or candy or, you know what I mean? Like I think they were just
interesting because you can see why that would just feel like a good thing to do.
Yeah, and it felt good as a kid. I was like proud of myself in that same exact way, and it didn't feel like I was going to be punished if I didn't or something.
But the punishment is just the
non-acknowledgement
of the non-acknowledgement, or even just the concept of having to think about being scrutinized. And
it's literally related to what you just said. Whether you're given a reward or not, it is irrespective of the journey to get there. It's only about the end result. You could have been like, I actually learned so much, but I just didn't do that well in this test. Or like, I got nervous and anxious and flubbed the exam, or I played piano at a competition and just like forgot something. That like doesn't actually say anything about the whole
fact that you learned the piece and forgot something.
Yeah, and now you like if you had a good time. Like I just think that type of parenting to remember, there's nothing wrong with wanting to achieve, but even when you don't, to be like, well, you tried really hard. And
I'm like so not a perfectionist. Like I was like thinking, I'm like, but first of all, like I'm like our parents, like it is so interesting. Like we have very different parents, and like your parents have created I think a few perfectionists in your family for whatever reason. And like my thing with my parents is like that they didn't like praise me enough. And like it's just so funny. Like I'm actually in this moment quite appreciative because I'm like, okay, I'm not a perfectionist.
It's not about,
it wasn't about like, but like obviously they still were like, if I was like doing bad, they'd be like, you're doing like bad. Like I don't know.
I think that's I'm just speaking from my own mind right now. Like it makes more sense to me to worry if something is going terribly wrong, right? Like if someone's not going to class or totally failing out of school, like then it feels appropriate to come in and be like, something's up.
I was never failing out of school, but I like do feel like sometimes I was like doing well, and they would just be like, cool, and like move on. I'd be like, well, where's my money? Like, or I would just be like, but my thing is that it's led me to be such an exaggerator because I feel like I was constantly wanting like some sort of praise, so I exaggerate everything because I'm trying to overcompensate
so that you get the reaction.
And it's like so crazy because I'll still do it and people will just be like, cool, and I'll be like, well, actually, like it was like just take $2 off what I pay. Like it's like it has led to this like kind of thing that I don't think is that damaging, but it is embarrassing when I'm caught in like these little like lies and people are just like, what is that? And I'm like, oh, it's because I actually was like constantly just wanting like some sort of affirmation. So I feel like there is like, I appreciate that I'm not a perfectionist because like I never was whatever to an extreme that you were like thought my parents were judging me in any way. But then also like I did a piano recital once and like truly went up and it was like Celine Dion Power of Love and it was just me like at this piano recital just like and then like the piano teacher came and sat beside me and like played it like pretty much for me. And then I like just was like, okay. Like, I mean, I like it obviously like when I got up there was like, damn, Greg, like you maybe should have practiced more. But it was cool how like I was never reprimanded. I was just like,
didn't feel
I was obviously probably purple in the face of embarrassment. But even after, I remember like
you were able to let it go.
Like at the reception, like the friends' parents being like, oh, you did good. And me just being like, LOL. Like, I know I didn't, but like kind of laughing and like,
so a healthier attitude to laugh.
Because it's an early memory and I was embarrassed. But there is just such a world where that is like a horrible memory where I'm like reprimanded and it's like
in trouble.
It's just really interesting that to me, it was a personal story for myself being like, A, I got through that. B, I can't believe I was able to not practice to the point that like I got up there and was literally like, I haven't practiced this like this. And then just sort of like, it was all about me learning that on my own. And to this day, even with my parents, I'm just like, I was never interested in piano. I wanted to be a dancer. Like, it's just like, it's so funny. Like, if they, I think, just chose it because it's like an easy thing to kid.
Music is always like encouraged.
But it's like, I didn't feel judged good or bad in that moment, but I felt embarrassed and it was just all on me.
It's natural. But that's nice that your parents just left room for it to not be a problem at all, you know?
I think,
I feel like for me, I never... Like I've had that similar experience. Like I did work really hard and I did like perform really well, usually at piano specifically. But there were a couple times when I fully blanked and I never ever got in trouble for it. You know what I mean? Like my parents would feel bad.
That would feel so crazy.
But I would self-judge myself and cry after. But my mom would just be like, it's fine. You know what I mean? Like, but it is interesting because even some of these studies say like, well, I saw some psychologists who did these studies were like, they think it's a pending public health issue because it's becoming so much more common, perfectionism, especially in a world that's like ultra competitive, whether it's school, like inequalities, like getting worse and worse. So there's like more competition and reason for parents to put pressure on their kids. But they said perfectionism can perpetuate through generations. And so perfectionist parents can raise easily perfectionist children because like you follow... You know what I mean? Like you learn those behaviors.
And it sounds like you're even not, it's like you can do it so by mistake. You're just trying to reward your kid when they do well.
And you're trying to create a situation where their future can be
bright.
And like opportunity, because obviously there's also the other end of things that you're worried about. Like if they don't get these opportunities, it's scary for a parent. But really, like, this study ended because they had found over the last 40 years, perfectionism has gone up 40%. Or sorry, it was pressure from parents has like gone up on average 40% for people. The expectations, the thing that they say is the worst. But it's like, what can parents actually do? Because they're also tied into this literal capitalist system that is driving the force of anxiety for everyone. That they were just like, you have to focus on learning and development, not test scores or social media. And that helps children develop healthy self-esteem, which doesn't depend on others' validation or external metrics. So it's like, of course you want your kids to do well. And I think that's totally okay to encourage them to, as long as the other end of like when they fail or if they fail, they're also taught how to deal with those emotions in a positive way.
Yeah.
Because like, no matter what, yes, we live in an ultra competitive world. And it's like from the parents' best intentions most of the time that they're trying.
It's so hard. Being a parent's so hard. You're just figuring out all the ways you're probably messing your kid up for trying to like just doing your best.
Yeah, and regardless, like I just think it's inevitable. That is evolution. We're just passing down traits. And at the same time, in a grander view, it's like humans are meant to be diverse, right?
Yeah,
like having all these different traits can allow us to like thrive and survive in different situations. Like perfectionism may be detrimental, but it can
definitely
also
helped you so much. It's just one of those things where it's like, but how is it not? And just learning about it.
Yeah, my final take on it is that same thing. Your greatest strength is your greatest weakness, almost always. I believe that, and it's just important to like focus on that and learn how it cannot be, like
and how it can become just keep it in the strength area.
And like learn. I just think like that dichotomy will always exist. So how do you minimize the weakness part of it, or just become really aware of it? So that it doesn't like, perfectionism can just lead to a lot of mental strife. That's definitely not worth what you get from it. I don't think.
No, it is, we've lived through a time where it's like not become just a good thing. Growing up, I would have been like, I wish I was one.
Yeah.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm sure there's other perfectionists out there. I'm sure you have lots of thoughts, so feel free to share it with us through, the internet. But thanks for listening. Otherwise, hopefully you can accept that your greatest strength is your greatest weakness. Okay, bye.